Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Down to Business. Today something a little bit different. We've got Miss Erica Thomas joining me. She's the headmistress at Newcastle Grammar School. And really, we're not going back to school, but we're talking about how the school can engage from a business perspective. A lot of people think a school's a school, and I think some valuable lessons to be learned that business owners can take on board and continue this journey that we've started. So, welcome, Erica.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. It's lovely to be here.
I guess, I know a bit about your background, given how we work, but maybe for the viewers, a bit about your background and introduction and really how you've ended up in beautiful Newcastle.
Yeah. Well, I moved to Newcastle 6 years ago, and I saw this great opportunity to take over Newcastle Grammar School and as the head of the school. And it was something that I was living in Sydney at the time, and I thought, wow, what a difference that might make. And can I, firstly look at the sorts of things that I might like to do in that school. I'd spent most of my career working in a range of independent schools in Sydney, and that had been very, very formative for me. I also spent an amazing year working in Canada and looking at different educational systems. And I know that when you are looking at jobs and you're thinking around how to move up the chain, if that's what you want to do, you've got to actually take those opportunities when they come to you. And I was in a really lovely position in that we were able to move. And I didn't know a lot about Newcastle at the time, but boy, did I do some research and realised, of course, that this was a great place to come and live.
It's funny, a lot of people still think it's, miners in the street and steel workers coming out, but it's very much changed.
Yeah, I think that was the perception, actually. When I told people that I was moving out of the independent system in Sydney and I was moving up here, they were sort of, wow, I've heard Newcastle might be changing, but how much has it really changed? And I think it's actually been really lovely to be part, in some ways, in more recent years, of that change.
Yeah, good stuff. And I guess, and I will probably disclose conflict, that I am on the board of the grammar, so hence our relationship. But I think even more so why I think this could be valuable for business owners, purely because a lot of people look at schools and think, well, it's easy. You've got all the money coming in from the government or whatever it may be, but I know that's far from the case. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of some of the challenges, we might just talk like Newcastle Grammar School. So it turns over, $28 million.
Correct.
Sounds like a lot of money, but out of that, not a lot is profit. So it's a fee paying. So very, very well, not very little, but quite a small proportion comes from actual government funding. Own infrastructure. We've got to maintain. How many people?
150 plus staff. Yeah, and
And
70% of fees that come into the school and government funding that comes into the school goes on paying staff.
That's right. Well, 72% to be precise.
Yeah, correct.
So if we look at what's left over, and I think it's a very big challenge that for the viewers, it's a school like that is quite a significant enterprise that's got to be run, which you can relate to a lot of the business challenges. And I know you've had some challenges yourself, and we've done very well with those challenges. But from an outsider, that might be the first case. So I guess with all that in mind, let's talk teamwork and leadership.
Yes, well, one of the first things that you've got to do in my role is to build the team around you to begin with. You're not an island, and in a school situation, you deal with so many different things. And as you've said, part of what we deal with every day is the business side of the school. But we've also got the HR side of the school. We've got the teaching side of the school, and teachers over the last few years have had to go through many, many hoops. You wouldn't believe, and most of your viewers wouldn't know, the amount of accreditation they have to do these days in professional learning. You've also got to manage students every day. And
social
media, everything that goes with dealing with kindergarten students or, very, very young students all the way through to 18-year-olds. And you never know what will walk through your door. So firstly, when you look at building a team, you've got to have people in your team that can manage many, many different aspects of your organisation. And that was a very, very key interest for me when I first came into the job. Did I have the right people around me? And how could we enhance what they're doing particularly? And one of the things that we did almost immediately was set up some things for my team in terms of mentorship. because we felt that that would be something. Schools often don't use business practices, and they haven't in the past. And so this was something that we were able to introduce fairly early on. And that made an incredible difference to the team.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think, from my time on the grammar board, for instance, and it was just a bit before you came on board, but one of the things that I kept trying to get out there that I think is often missed with government bodies, charities, etc., that just because you're a not-for-profit doesn't mean you're not in the game to make a profit. Without a profit, you can't achieve your objectives. So it very much is a business, and one that has to be run like a business in order to be there for the long term.
Yes, and I think you've got to remember that most people in schools started their role as teachers. I started my role as an English and a history teacher. Now, did I ever think I'd be running a business like I'm currently doing? No.
And that's a good point, because it's like you say that about teachers, but carpenters, doctors, accountants, like literally they are good at what they do. I mean, a lot of people think I've got an accountant, they know business. Yeah. I can tell you most accountants don't know how to run a business, which is a scary concept.
That is, actually.
but they know how to do accounting.
Yeah.
If you want to learn how to do business, you probably do a business degree or go through a master of business or something. Like, I don't think anyone in a vocation that generally get their progression because they're good at something, but they don't get shown how to run a business. They don't get shown how to manage things, how to manage people, how to manage stakeholders. And I think that's a very good point you raised from the teaching side of things, but it applies to nearly every viewer, I would imagine, because they're being good at what they do. And they go, I'm running a business.
Yeah, you're right. And I reached a point where I realised I had to do, and that's actually part of leadership, isn't it? Recognising what you can't do. And recognising that you might be managing a whole team of people. They might have their different role. You've got to be able to ask the right questions to those people if you're not quite on top of what they're doing. But in addition to that, you've got to understand the whole entity. And doing that, and that is part of leadership, I think, recognising that.
And I guess you've got even the bigger challenge, and please take this the wrong way, but you know me, I'm pretty black and white. But I think teachers teach and therefore know a lot. How do you galvanise that team so that you still are the leader and you can delegate and ensure that the strategy, the message, or whatever is delivered consistently as opposed to their take on what they want to put out?
And I'm not taking that the wrong way at all, and I don't think any of my staff would either. When you are the master of your classroom or the master of exactly what you do, sometimes it's hard to see that whole. So one of the key things that we needed to do was to look at what our strategy was going to be and to sit down and work through a strategic plan with the board and with my executive staff, and then work out how to communicate that to staff. And I often say that, our staff are our greatest assets in many ways, and they've got to be, and they've realised, and I'm very, very lucky because our team were actually, on the whole, very excited about what might happen. And change was tough. I came into an environment that didn't have a strategic plan, that did have, enormous potential to grow and to have strategy. But yes, trying to get every teacher in your school, for example, to understand that they're part of that journey, that's a hard thing to do.
And I think for viewers, but for context, you also came in at a time, you were the first change in a 25-year headmaster before you, who'd done a wonderful job. There's no doubt about that, and really set Newcastle Grammar. But change is hard enough as it is, let alone after such a long time and people used to a certain way. So talk about that. Yeah.
Well, for the first few months, and in fact probably the first year, I'd do things very normally that I thought were normal, to find that was a huge change for people. And trying to communicate that really clearly with your staff, that we are going to progress, that schools can't, like any business, can't stand still. That was one of my key jobs. And I know that we tried a range of things. We split staff into small groups where we talked through issues. We had big meetings where we looked at what strategy was and what would they like in this strategy to be part of that journey. And I think that even though this was very, very tough for a lot of people at the start, I think it was a really good lesson for me in change management, okay, but it was also a really good lesson for an organisation that it is possible, but it's incremental and small steps.
Well, I think
and you've got to bring people on the journey.
Yeah, and I think you've shown the perfect thing that not everything works. And you know, in many businesses that something doesn't work, you know, we throw everything out rather than sitting there and saying, well, let's reflect and tweak and move to the next stage and work out what does work.
Yeah. This school too had 100 years of history. And when you come into an organisation where you've got 100 years of history, you've got a lot of investment in that history. And you've got to make sure that what you're doing aligns both with that history, but also creates a vision for the future.
That's right. Yeah.
And the educational context itself has changed enormously. Even in the last 5 years, I look at the changes that we've had to have because of compliance things that have changed. I look at the ways that the world of work is changing. And schools aren't islands, you know. I'm not a single leader. Schools themselves are parts of communities. And that's actually something that I think increasingly business will begin, I hope, to see. I think, you know, there's a lot around how kids are leaving school, they don't have the right skills, you know. You see all of this sort of negative media attention. I am absolutely blown away by what kids can achieve and the sorts of things that they're now doing as part of curriculum. But if you think of your technology changes that have happened in the world of business over the last even 5 years, that repeats in a school. And the demands on schools just grow and grow and grow. And curriculum therefore changes. And that's huge for staff every time we get a major curriculum change. We have to constantly evaluate things from our early literacy programs and are they working for us to get the sort of skills that we need later on, to what are we teaching in year 7 and 8 technology that really becomes something that is much more cutting edge when we know that kids are already moving through the school, knowing how to code or do whatever it is. So this change is something that I think might be interesting to business longer term.
Well, I think it's also, you know, and no disrespect to any of the other schools and that, but government schools or certain religious schools, etc., children are going to turn up, you know, they have to go to school, etc. With an independent school such as what you lead, you're not only got to make sure you're getting the children engaged and make sure they've got the skills, but you've got other stakeholders that effectively pay the fees that you've got to make sure are getting value and can continue. So, you know, how do you ensure that whole loop is covered off on?
Yeah, and that loop is something that is absolutely important. One of the things that we do is survey our stakeholders to make sure that we are delivering what we think we are delivering to their children. I've got to have things that are really key so that parents feel that they can contact the school at any point. But the flip side of that is the proactive side. And they're the information evenings, the webinars, all those sorts of things that we try to do to continue to engage those parent stakeholders with us. I often think that, you know, in any organisation, and schools, of course, there will be conflict and there will be problems that arise. And I'll smile and say, you know, you don't deal with 14 and 15-year-olds every day. But of course there are going to be problems that arise when you're dealing with, you know, multiple children in an environment. But it's hopefully you can do that in a timely way and you can manage that, because that's when often the stakeholder is the one that's getting really, you know, nervous about how things might be working. They're very concerned for their child. Of course they are. So you've got to manage my stakeholders in a range of ways, and I hope that we can do it in a very personable way. I hope that relationship building is one where people feel a sense of trust.
Yeah, because I think the key thing there is too understanding what that, I guess, what value means to each stakeholder as well. You know, like for years I would think, and you know, touch wood, but Grammar's done pretty well in this space as well. But for years it was all about the HSC, you know, where to rank, and that is obviously a big measure. But I know from a personal, you know, network and that sort of thing that a lot of people are just like, we just want to get more for our children than, you know, they don't have to have the highest HSC score. It might be making them more confident, more resilient, or how do you get that information? I think it's important from a business owner's point of view to say, do we understand what our market really wants and what our point of difference is?
Do you know, Andrew, I continue to interview most of the students coming into at least one part of the school, the secondary school. And the one thing that parents will always say to me, you ask them the question, what are you looking for from us? And student well-being. Well-being. And it's exactly what you've said, resilience, etc., will be one of those key parts. I think that we've had opportunity to, at various points, bring in experts to talk to our parents about well-being. We've been able to launch a whole well-being program at our school in the last 3 years. And I think that what we find is that managing that side of it, and I think you're absolutely right, what parents are looking for is more than just the number on the page at the end of the HSC. The other thing that's happening, and most of the parents who have kids that are older understand, is that number is becoming less and less important as the university sector changes and the world of work changes. And so there is a challenge in itself, isn't it? Where school is often set up to get everybody through, to get an HSC, to get a great result. But you've got to be offering far more than that in your environment. And, one of those areas that our school really works on is that co-curricular program, because the other thing that parents want, they know that well-being and this idea of a holistic education, where children have a range of opportunities, both inside and outside the classroom, is something that is actually going to contribute to the well-being. And if they want that result, it contributes to that result in the end.
Yeah, sure, a bit of balance.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come back to some of the offerings that Grammar does, but from a point of view of your role, let's get a bit more specific on that as the leader, if you like. And I mean, obviously you report to a board, etc. But talk about some of the things that you're exposed to. We've touched on a few, but is in a sense of running a business as opposed to a school. Because realistically, your operational sense is delivering education. But as you alluded to, you've got HR, you've got finance, you've got physical. What's some of the things that you find yourself and in that area, and how you're structured to deal with?
Well, certainly my school has a business manager and a business team. And I know that I have to meet with that team and work with that team frequently. One of the things that, I need to do every week, or probably more than every week, is to sit down and have a look at how the business is actually running. And is that working for us? Are we chewing up too many resources for what's coming in? And how do we actually position ourselves that we're getting sustainability in that business? So I would sit down with my business manager every week. We would look at a range of things in those meetings to ensure that we are tracking reasonably well. And as I said before, I have to, my background was an English history teacher, but I have to ask the right questions of that person. I also have a relationship with a company that helps us with HR, and I would have a weekly meeting in that area as well. And that is something that I think is really key to the management of the business, and making sure that is working well. Yeah,
so I guess that's another, saying about knowing your strengths and weaknesses and where you need support, and also there's only so many hours in the day, and how you get leverage to run a business of that size.
And Andrew, I've had to do additional training and courses to really understand business. And that was something that I really committed to, both in my previous job and when I came here. And I think that is something that you can never underestimate the value of doing that. The other thing that I have is an opportunity to look at, not that it's necessarily the absolute business side of things, but I have a number of colleagues across New South Wales that run very similar schools. And it's really, really helpful that I can reach out to one of them and say, hi, this doesn't look right, or what are you thinking in this particular area? And that for me is one of the most helpful business practices rather than educational practices that I have and I use all the time.
And sometimes that's just having people to vent to, or I'm going through the same thing and having a sounding board. You mentioned mentoring before. It's the same concept. I think you've hit on the head when you said you're not an island, and that's what more business owners need to see. That some people just get in that rut and think that they're by themselves, and how do we get out of this? But I guess that's leadership.
It is, and I think you've got to, as I said before, recognise where you don't know things, but you've also got to look at what other people are doing, because I don't believe you can operate really well without knowing. Yes, there's your competitors, but there's also what's happening in that wider sector that you can really learn from. And I think, that has been one of the most valuable things.
Yeah, and there's some great business leaders, from Branson and these type of people to Bill Gates, etc. I mean, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Correct.
You can sit there and go, what can we learn from? What can we adapt? What can we copy? Like, we've got to get over a bit sometimes, like it's ego and chest beating, and say, well, what's working well that we could really learn from and apply here?
I would actually agree with you. And one of the organisations I do belong to is a group of principals across Australia. And every day someone would ask a question on a closed channel that we have. And the things that you can learn just from some of the answers to that and reading what people are interested in alone. And I think in that sense, a lot of principals of schools now have to have a look at what's happening, not just in that educational sector, but you mentioned some of those big business owners, some of where there are initiatives that are happening, and how do they actually translate into your environment?
And it's not that hard. I mean, in some industries they have or some markets they have these groups set up already, but I've found it's not that hard to set up a sounding board or to set up an advisory board or a group of peers. Most people are in the same boat and they just wait for someone to say, would you like to be a part of this? And if business owners could get over the fact they go, but they're a competitor, I go, well, are they really a competitor? And sometimes it might be a different industry, but there's always a way around to get a group of like-minded people that can help each other.
Yeah, I found more often than not that everyone wants to be part of something like that. So yeah, it's a good thing. Okay,
how have you grown in your role, and what has assisted for your growth?
Yeah.
I mean, you've mentioned a few things that you've done, but let's explore that a bit more.
Okay. I think probably, if I look at growth, it's been a long time. It's not something that just happens. I was very lucky when I was at a school, probably 3 schools ago, that I had a principal at the school who said, Erica, he sat me down and he said, I actually think you've got a really good career going to happen for you, and this is what I think you need to do. And I was a bit taken aback at that point, and you sort of sit back a bit and you don't think, oh, that's not really where I'm going to go with this. But he kept at it, and he gave me opportunities in the school itself to do things that I would never have done. Marketing was one of the key things that I was able to do, and I think that was a really good opportunity, and taking those opportunities when they come to you. He got me travelling around New South Wales marketing the school and doing things, and I was still the history teacher at that stage, and he saw something in me. So number one, I think that was really part of my growth. I needed that sort of push and that ability to see that there was something else.
Again, if I translate that for business owners, it's who do you need in your team to have a talent management program, or who you need to be fostering.
And I actually think that's something I've learned all the way through, that now that I'm in a similar type of position, I look to see who I can help and who to foster. And I think that's something that you really can gain from. The second thing I have done all the way through my career is taken those opportunities. There have been jobs there that I haven't wanted to do. And they've been really good experience though. And that might sound a bit strange, that people think schools, you just teach or you do whatever, but there are so many different jobs in schools, as I've pointed out. And I've been given opportunities to do things that took me for a year, completely outside my comfort zone. And that, I think, has made an incredible difference to growth. Then I recognised at a particular point that I needed to do some more study. and I sat down and did some more study, a master's degree. And again, that was in an area that I was not overly comfortable with. I decided, no, I needed to know more in a particular area and sat down and did that. And that was really, really hard work. It's so hard to study when you're working full time and you've got commitments with family and everything else. But again, the push that gives you, I think, can be, again, something that really helps.
And on that point, it doesn't even have to necessarily be formal study. It could just be reading.
Correct. And that would be something that I'd say that I do now, which is fairly constant in my life, is just to continue to read, to keep updating things. I've been really lucky. You know, I work with a board at the moment that definitely pushes me in different directions, and I think that that's a really healthy thing. It's really healthy for the organisation. It's fantastic governance. But personal growth that I've had from that has been enormous.
And I think that's a good point. Sorry, just on that, when you mentioned governance, the governance expectations on a school is huge, and and the hard thing is, you know, you can't remunerate for governance, so you're trying to get people to give up their time and more time to do this kind of stuff to support you. So if a school can get that point, you know, business owners have no excuse not to get people in there to help them drive their business, you know, because, you know, for one, they can pay them, but two, you know, it's probably more mainstream for businesses than schools. So it's just a good point.
No, and I think too, you know, some of the hardest and the best growth moments for me come when there are some hard decisions to be made and I couldn't do them alone. And the board have sent me again to rethink something or to put something, you know, down a little bit more. And I've got a diverse group of people that are giving different opinions. But I think that's so positive.
They shortage of opinions.
Yeah, definitely not. But that's definitely helped this business grow and this school grow. And that, I think, is a really key part of it. The other growth thing I've got to say is that it's really important for me to realise that I'm part of a wider educational community. And yes, principals have a network, but there are organisations too that support that network. And, you know, there's that moment where, although this year's been a little bit easier, where I don't want to drive to Sydney to go to a particular meeting, but I realise if I'm not at that meeting, I don't hear exactly what is going on. And so I make that drive. This year, of course, been a little bit easier because of Zoom and, you know, Teams and everything else that we've been using. And I hope that actually becomes something that might continue and become really, really positive, because I think the growth that you can have when more people can actually join into these things is enormous.
Yeah, that's good. That's real good. You just mentioned this year. I mean, obviously this year being COVID, but maybe just a quick, you know, jump over to that. Talk about not just COVID, but the ability for a business or a school, in your case, to be agile and be able to adapt and think on their feet, etc.
Well, I think, Andrew, like every other business, we've never faced anything like it. And schools for a little while were almost a political football. And I don't know if anyone remembers back to those days in March, April and May, where constant regulations and changes were continuing to happen. So, number one, we were dealing with really, really different compliance than we've ever dealt with before. Secondly, like every other business, we were sitting there and thinking, what is this going to mean for our business? And the need to be lean and the need to be agile and the need to have a continuity plan, the need to be able to see what the impact was likely to be and to model what that impact might be. And I think, you know, to be able to sit down, which we were with the help of some board members and whatever, and sit down and actually say, right, these things have to go on hold immediately. These things have to happen. And I think that's been a really good lesson for our business, the ability to realise that this could happen. And I think that was probably one of the biggest shocks to begin with, that you're moving along, you've got your plans in place, you think that you're going in a particular direction, and all of a sudden, something completely out of your control hits. And this was enormous for us. what we did was we formed basically a small crisis team. And that small crisis team was meeting really, really frequently to manage the range of things we were needing to manage. Not the least of which was to ensure that we had a technology system for 900 plus children who could learn from home. And
I think one of the key things you just said was, COVID, for instance, and there'll be many other things that have happened or will happen in the future that we can't control. And how many people, like business owners, just get focused on something they can't control rather than taking control of what they can to mitigate that and make opportunity in some cases. So I know I've seen it firsthand, but the school's been very good and the feedback's been sensational compared to other schools, for instance, but just generally from students not missing a beat going through. But it's okay, we can't focus on any of that. What can we focus on?
Yeah, and I think that was a really good lesson for us. You've got people in your own team, and I've got over 150 staff who are going through their own personal crisis when something like this happens. They've got their own family demands. All sorts of things are happening. So you've got your staff that you've got to look after. You've got to make sure that you're agile enough to be able to do this. And I remember there was a moment, it was probably late July, where I changed the conversation and said, okay, so what opportunities are coming from this? And I think some of my team nearly fell over at that point and said, we don't want to talk about that at the moment. We're still, very, very nervous. But then gradually, within about 2 weeks, it all changed. And they could see that what we'd done was actually pretty good.
Well, and the
what could we then build on?
Your numbers grew during that period of time. So I think it's a wonderful point. I think, the key message here is focus on what you can control.
Exactly.
And you will come through because, hopefully, touch wood, not another COVID, but stuff happens every day.
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so let's get on to, you briefly touched on before how businesses are starting to get it or maybe starting to get it. And, it's an area I'm passionate about. How do we engage business within the school community? And talk to me about the importance of a relationship with community and business with the school.
Yeah, look, I'm really excited about what some of the opportunities could be in the future between business, industry and school. I think that, firstly, and I said before that one of the things that I think that we're facing at the moment is that the world is actually changing. And we know that university sector is changing slightly and there are much more flexible options for university as well. And what we know is that kids these days might want a bit of a dual path as they leave school. Now, there's work placement type ideas where, you kids in year 10 and 11 are always looking for work placement opportunities. But where I think business could really come in is certainly in that area. But we're interested in some partnerships. And 2 years ago, we spent a lot of time setting up some industry partnerships in the STEM area, knowing that in the future we'd grow it into different areas.
So for viewers, STEM?
STEM is science, technology, engineering and maths. And what we wanted were some real life opportunities for our students. But what the end goal would be that a student might go there for work placement, continue to have a relationship with that business, but I would hope would become one of the employees ultimately for that business if they're really good in that area and passionate about it. And what we think can happen, and we know that it can now, is that students can leave school. They can almost do a cadetship type idea, and that is work part-time with a particular business while they're doing uni. And we've got an increasing number of students that want that real life experience as well as that academic experience as well. And I think business in the next few years will be uniquely placed to have a relationship with schools.
Well, and it absolutely makes sense from how fast, as you mentioned before, technology, how fast things are changing in a business sense. If you're bringing kids through that are learning this stuff and can apply. I was only in a meeting this afternoon on marketing and search engine optimization. They gave me a full presentation and I said afterwards, that's great. Don't know what the hell you said. If it works, I'll trust you. But reality is that's going to be more and more common for business leaders have to be leaders and recognise where we need relationships, where we need to bring other people through.
Yeah, you need a workforce. Everyone needs a workforce that's highly committed, highly skilled, and really motivated to work there. And I think that what we can probably, achieve, schools and industry, business, etc., are some really fantastic partnerships. I'd say a lot of businesses would like to know that you've got a 16-year-old in your school or a 17-year-old in your school who knows exactly where they're going in the future, has an absolute passion for what you do. And I think we could probably have some very, very mutually benefit relationships.
Yeah, good. Yeah. And so just on that, and not to idle too long, but in regards to focuses of curriculum where businesses may engage, I mean, we said STEM, that's obviously a big one, and that can lead into so many different areas of practical, commercial and industry. Music's a big one for the school?
Oh, absolutely. But look, I look at things like, I've got year 9 and 10 students now organising little businesses and pitching those businesses in real life situations to panels and doing a whole range of things.
I've got an almost 13-year-old who's got her own business, little going. And she's coming up with things that I go, geez, I wouldn't have learnt that till I was, mid-20s or whatever.
We've got a program in the school that supports elite athletes, and I watch those kids on a different sort of path, and one that definitely is a path leading towards a professional athletic career in some way, or sports career for many of them.
But an alternative, part of that is whether they can be ambassadors for business, they can be engaged in media, etc. So I think these are some of the messages that need to go out, and businesses need to actually take a proactive step and understand where they can benefit, because it is mutual. It's not just one way.
Correct. And I think, that I'm in a lucky position in an independent school in that we can set some of these pathways. And that we've got the agility to work with people. And I think in a town like Newcastle, to be honest, it's in some ways easier to do this. And it's, yes, enhancing the technology that we've all learnt to do so well this year in COVID, but it's also the fact that it's easy to actually get around. Yeah. And you're not sitting in traffic and, managing a whole range of stresses just to get to the place that you need to get to.
Yeah.
And I think what we've got here in Newcastle is something that's actually really special.
That's great. Here's one for you. Some of the lessons you've learned in your career that have been hard, but most beneficial.
Yeah. I think that's really a great question, Andrew. And I think that's something that you always reflect on. I think some really hard moments that I've had. One was an appraisal that didn't go particularly well a few jobs ago. I learnt more from that appraisal than I had, and from any other thing I think that I've done. And it was an appraisal that was not necessarily something that was negative, but I think, I was at a particular point in my career and I thought things were going, reasonably well. And I realised that I had to do a particular piece of change management in this school that I was in. It hadn't gone as well as I thought it had gone. And the appraisal showed it. I learnt an enormous amount from that around change and team. That seems like a long time ago now, but the moment you asked that question, I remember it really, really well, because I think that was probably pretty formative.
It's funny in that case, and don't get me wrong, I've had the same experience and I've probably given that experience to plenty of people in their time as well. And I think you can go two ways. You can actually learn from it, or you can throw the dummy out of the cot at the end of the day, and that doesn't help anyone. And that's, I think, whether that be an individual appraisal or a business appraisal or a performance, etc. Most people can really, if they chose to sit there and go, was there truth in this, and what do I need to take on board?
Yeah.
So as you said, you can grow quite a bit.
Yeah, and I think that's a great learning thing around appraisal. But it doesn't have to be, even though you might look at it and think, oh, that's negative or terrible. In fact, if you take it the right way, it actually leads to some significant growth. Other things, I think, I'm sure that we've all had difficult people that we've worked with at various times. And, you sort of feel as though you're swimming against the stream a little bit, and you're trying to get something happening, or you're trying to bring someone on board, and it doesn't quite happen. I've also learned a lot from that. And I don't think, that you end up where in the role that I'm in at the moment without having those sort of things happen. I think you can learn a lot from conflict, and you can learn a lot.
Oh, you can absolutely. The problem is most people are so scared of confrontation because they put negative connotations around it that, once you do have that conversation and deal with the issue, and we had a great video with Richard Jones a few videos ago, or a few sessions ago, and he said he got taught the same thing. He said when you realise there's an issue, deal with it as fast as you can and get out of there.
Yeah.
But how many people let it run on and on and on, and then when you have to do it, it also gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Correct. And I think you've got to learn, and I think this is something that is hard to learn, that you do take it front on as much as you possibly can, and that you don't let it fester in any way. I think that, there've been hard moments. There've been hard moments in this job that I'm currently in. And sometimes you've got to make decisions that not everyone is going to like. And but you do learn from all of that. So I think that is something that...
Oh yeah, and if you do it with authenticity, then you can hold your head high. And obviously the learnings in the job are working. I think a few stats when you came on board, I think the school was down to, they had a big Year 12 leave, it was down to 711 students, I think, the lowest I can remember. And we're now up to about 655 or thereabouts,
No, a lot more than that, Andrew.
Sorry, 955. 955. There you go. What's 300 between friends? But I should know that. I was only in last night's report. But significant growth. And I think that's a good measure for saying, are your stakeholders engaged?
Yeah.
And there's another, a lot of people often think, and I used to think this, to be fair, that people that go to grammar, it's obviously got all the money, etc., etc. But we've got people working 3 jobs to be able to send their children to grammar, and you've got to make sure you can deliver. And I don't say that so much as in context of the school, but for a business, you have to understand your stakeholders. You have to understand what those key success measures are. And you have to make sure you're continually getting that feedback loop, because before you know it, it could go the other way.
Absolutely. And, that is definitely something that I've learned. And that's the importance of that feedback loop and ensuring that that's reasonably frequent. And I think that's actually something that, probably we did more of in 2020 because of COVID than we've ever done before. But actually the flip side of that was, I think most people appreciated the fact that we were doing that. And, we've had responses to surveys this year like we've never had in the past. And I think everybody's feeling, actually, we want to be part of something and we want to feel connected. And we do want to give you feedback. And, and I think that is something that we can definitely take away from this.
Very good. And some of the exciting things, there's a new master plan on which has been signed off. Yeah.
There is, and that's another, sort of part of my role is making sure that the facilities are up to date, and I'm really excited about what that might deliver ultimately. And to begin with, for those of you who know our school, we've got some very old buildings down at our primary campus, and the change that we might get there in the future, and I think is probably one of the most exciting things.
And that's just
on my agenda.
That's another example of where, hard decisions have to be made and priorities need to be put in place. And, I was just going to say, you're going to have to go and do a bit more reading on how to raise capital. You're going to pay for these things, but it's a constant learning curve, and it's knowing what resources you have and how to allocate them most effectively to get the result to please the majority.
Indeed.
I think one of the greatest things I ever heard was you can please 95% of the people 95% of the time, and if you get that right, you're doing okay.
Yeah, I think I'd be delighted if I could get that right each day.
Well, we could keep talking for ages, but I think what I wanted to get out of this, and I think we've achieved it, is very much about, whilst it's a school, it's very much a business. And a lot of the lessons that lessons, pardon the pun, but a lot of the lessons you get every day are very much what a business owner can look at, should be applying, and the challenges that a school goes through with a lot more stakeholders and individuals. from a business owner, just take elements of this out, and you could get in front. And just to recap some of the quick things is the importance of teamwork, and you're not an island. Having a good leadership group that you can delegate to, having a good meeting framework and governance structure that you can hold each other accountable, get the one message out there. Some of the things that you've grown from is actually some of the hardest things, and reflecting and making sure you continue to invest in yourself, as the leader. Have peer groups, have people you can bounce off. The importance and not only now, but the exciting opportunities for business to get engaged with a school, with the changing technology. That's really exciting. Probably one of the other things was just making sure that you understand your stakeholders, making sure you understand your value proposition, making sure that you're constantly getting feedback to understand that you're not getting stale and you don't think you've made it and that's it, but you continue to drive this business, So,
I think you've summed up that really well.
Well, I mean, as I said, there's so many lessons we can get out of this, and there's so much more we can talk about. But that was great, and I really appreciate you doing one of these sessions.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks for joining me. And to everyone, hopefully you get a bit out of it. And until next time, there's another episode of Down to Business. So, cheers.